So welcome everybody to this online talk on spirituality, trauma and relationships. My name is Nadine Steurer and this talk is part of my project Nomadic Space 33, which has the intention to create spaces for transformation, self-unfolding and also for mutual learning. I am super excited to welcome Gregor Steinmaurer today, who is a systemic therapist, a trauma therapist, but also trained in a variety of other approaches, including childhood conditioning, energy reading, and many more. He has a lot of experience in guiding groups and facilitating workshops, also in the area of conscious relating. And at the moment, he's involved in several projects that are dealing also with raising awareness for and like support for dealing with the aftermath of collective and intergenerational trauma. This talk itself is kind of part of my own journey and well, the main inspiration for the talk is actually coming from an attempt to live an idea of relationship and spirituality and kind of then just life happening and noticing that gap between what I felt is possible and where I realized that I am at the current point in time. And I was also challenged by a way of interpreting spirituality that would kind of diminish the importance of the body and also of feelings and the subjective experience. And that kind of led to kind of also me being confronted with old trauma and being kind of kept in certain trauma cycles. And by my kind of attempt to understand more what is happening, I just find people and situations on my way that bring me missing links that help my understanding and also lead me to a spirituality that feels more grounded and open to life. And with that, I will not keep you waiting much longer. We will dive into media res. And I will open with a question that I will pose to Gregor, which is mainly to kind of define his understanding of spirituality, of trauma, as those are two very broad terms. And it will kind of be a good starting point to just hear which understanding he has of those mentioned areas.
Okay, so thank you, Nadine, and welcome everybody. Just checking if my sound is okay, if everybody can hear me well. Okay, sounds good. So yeah, welcome everybody. It's great to see some familiar faces and also new faces and probably a good mix of different places where people are dialing in. So I'm calling in from my home in Austria right now. Yeah, and I'm super excited to talk about this, which is really a big passion in my life and has been like a defining feature of my work, I would say, in the last 20 years, or even more for me personally. And I just want to, before I go into your question of answering with the definitions, which in itself is a difficult task, find definitions, especially for spirituality, but also for trauma. Just to reference what you said, because that already is for me an example of why it is so important to have a conversation like we're having tonight about that spirituality and trauma need to meet, in my understanding, if you want to go forward with our evolution as human beings. And that kind of spirituality that can actually become a repetition of patterns rather than an unfolding of potential is very important. So I would say, just to set the frame, because the talk is called Spirituality, Trauma and Relationships. Let's not define relationships, but just a few words about what I think about spirituality. So there's so much out there, so there is no way to make it a simple definition. But for me personally, I would say it's a way of approaching life in a way that I feel guided and held by something larger than just myself in this life and in this experience. And in our modern world, that's often what we have as the highest reference point, is myself and my mind and my intellect and my rationality, which is a beautiful tool. But spirituality would mean to bring in something that holds that in perspective. So it's that which always gives us perspective to ourselves and to our current experience, and is in a way that which gives space and also meaning, because we're deeply at our core of our being, I would say we are spiritual beings, and we yearn and we need and we long for experiences that kind of bring us in contact with something larger than ourselves. And if we don't have that, and there's many names for that, it becomes life becomes either very meaningless or very painful or flat. And one part is also that this is an approach to life, but for me, it would also mean that I am having a certain kind of practice of not just hoping that I'm held and I'm feeling like something larger than myself, but I also have a practice how to bring that into my life and how to realign myself with something larger than myself that I ascribe to. And there are many different spiritual traditions and religions, so this doesn't give justice to all of them, but I think it's one of the main features that would combine, let that kind of create a larger frame of when we talk about the spiritual approach to life. And then going to the other pillar, and we're going to have it a bit like two poles for this exploration tonight, talking about trauma. Maybe I just start with a very short story. I started out very early in my life with a very deep spiritual quest, and I went to traditions and practices and went to India and different places with the deep yearning of wanting to find answers. And I found many. And also I found another big question on that journey, which is that I felt something's missing here and something doesn't always apply. And that led me actually to learning about trauma for the first time. And when that came in me, it was like something came together that always felt like either this or that is missing. I already had known about therapeutic work and then had done healing work, but only when this came together, it started to make sense for me, like a full and integrated approach to life. And so we're going to talk about trauma tonight. And for that, it's also important to also say a few words what I mean by that, because it's a very big word. It actually becomes very fashionable, which is a great new development, because 30, 40 years in spirituality, nobody would talk about trauma. Even in therapy, often there was not much understanding of what we know now about the human nervous system and the deep embodiment of patterns and woundings. So when we talk here about trauma, I don't mean it so much in a clinical term, like with post-traumatic stress disorder or other definitions that are out there, but more like an understanding of the deep woundedness that human beings can experience when we experience situations or tragedies or painful situations, either in one moment, which is often referred to as a shock trauma. You have a car accident or a sudden loss of a parent or some beloved one or other tragedies, or situations that are so ongoing and so pervasive that they become part of you, almost like that you don't know anymore even that life can be different. And so there's a few different definitions, and one is like the shock trauma variation, where something like contracts in life and cannot find a way to release and relax anymore. And the other, which is very important, is more held by the awareness of like that whatever we experience when we're very young and from very early on becomes part of ourselves, and the way we were related to and have experienced our relationships. That's why relationship is such an important element in this talk. How we experienced our relationships can us make very resilient and strong, but they can also leave very, very deep imprints that we would now call traumatic patterns out of our development. So developmental trauma is even the more newer way to approach this topic, so that we see there are certain things that we all take for granted and consider normal, yelling at children, scolding them, locking them into a door because they are not behaving, and things like this that were kind of the norm in certain generations for child rearing, are actually now, when we look deeper, we see how much wounding they create for the human nervous system, for the human psyche, and for the health of a person. So there's different things we lump together with the definition or with the word of trauma, but it basically means a certain kind of wounding that is so deep and so strong that you cannot just overcome it by trying to change yourself. Because there are certain, that's important, that there are certain patterns sometimes in our life that we all know, little habits, and if we work on it and we practice something, we can change. And there are certain elements to ourselves, which is more held by the word trauma, that feel they're so deep, so intrinsic. Sometimes we don't even know yet that these are patterns. We think that's how my life is, and that's how other people are, that's how the world is, that it's very difficult to change by will. And that's very important for the combination also of spirituality, that I also here encounter something that seems to be larger than myself. And so I think that I would give as a first starting point for the conversation of what we are talking about when we talk about spirituality and trauma. And yeah, let's dive into it, into how they actually can how they relate to each other and how they benefit from each other when we are aware of these dimensions of life.
Yeah, thank you for giving us a better understanding of what you mean when you talk about spirituality and trauma. At one point, you already mentioned the nervous system. Could you go a bit deeper into the nervous system, its role, and also functioning and the relevance for our topic?
Right. Yeah, that's another huge topic. So the nervous system, it's again, like when I first heard about it, it was so fascinating for me to see that there is a function, there's a intelligent functioning in ourselves that in a way stores all our resilience and actually keeps us alive all the time. So in a very physiological term, we talk about the nervous system as that which keeps you breathing, even when you don't think about it. Because when you would be only breathing when you think about it, human beings wouldn't have survived very long. So there's something that takes care of your life, your breath, of your heart rate, of pumping your blood to all over the body and taking care of your temperature, all these basic functions of life that are maintaining themselves all the time from day one of your life, from your existence. So there's a certain dimension that we are not aware of, but that is deeply regulating your experience of how you perceive yourself. And that also affects your hormones, and it affects, therefore, then your emotions. Basically, it's the way you feel yourself, because you all know when something goes adrift in your temperature, just 1 Celsius more, and you feel terrible or less. So it's a kind of a fine-tuned equilibrium that is working all the time to keep that in its best way, so that you feel well and can go about your life. And the nervous system at the same time is a place that stores the deepest learning that we experience in our life. And most of it, first of all, is unconscious. So it also explains certain habits and preferences and tendencies that we have, that we might get very quickly activated or triggered in certain situations. And for the next person, that's not really a big deal. So it explains kind of like the hard wiring in ourselves that often determine behavior and experiences that we think is either then weird or crazy, or this person is like this person is like that, while this is learned programs, simply speaking, that we have picked up at one point. So it's kind of like the hard wiring and the software component of ourselves in one place, and it's a very complex function, and it's a beautiful thing. And I think that's not so much discussed yet in scientific literature, that there is also a function of the human nervous system that responds to something that's right in life, or also perceives when something is wrong. There's like an innate capacity to feel if something is on, like is for life, or if it's off the line or off alignment. So, and that also is like, in a way, it's the cosmic navigation system through this human life and this human experience. And it can sometimes feel like this is our enemy, because it creates experiences that we don't like, that I get too activated, that I get shy, that I blush, that I get very angry at seemingly small things, and so on and so forth, or that I feel scared in certain moments. But actually, underneath all of this is a deeply intelligent system that tried its best and is still trying its best all the time to adapt as much as possible to the experiences that we are in. And of course, that then becomes very important in relationships, because we're relational beings. Our nervous system is also relational. So one system is already complex, but put two systems together and let them interact in close proximity and with lots of passion, and it can get very complex, as we all know. And that's then often what you said before, like the place where we meet a certain kind of reality, or at least we become we meet the signposts that point to places in ourselves that are yearning for healing or regulation, or a different form of expansion. Because we all know when we feel regulated and well-resourced, that means our nervous system is running smooth. Or when we feel out of sync, displaced, next to myself, we have many words like I cannot connect with myself anymore. That means something got so activated in our nervous system that it finds itself hard to regulate back to a place that feels that I can cope and deal and enjoy life. So I think that's the quick entry, and which is maybe just one offer to everybody. The fastest way, because it's called autonomic nervous system, so it's not something you can change by will only, but it has like entry gates, and the strongest entry gate to influence it is your breath. It's the most immediate. So everybody, if you just want to, so you're also listening to information and all kinds of things. If you want, just take a little bit of a longer out breath, for example, because the nervous system is like the gas pedal. So we can inhale and get adrenaline and energy if we need to do something, but it's also the brake or the regulation pedal that goes down, which we need if we want to relax, recharge, sleep, enjoy. We need to find our way back. So you want to do just another couple of longer out breaths, and when you do that, maybe just feel that the out breath is like allowing your weight to land more on your chair or however you're sitting. So that's the place of coming more into the body, which is the kind of the counter movement to trauma, because trauma is often that which moved us out of our body or into higher activation, or disconnects us from what we experience in our feelings. Yeah, right. Yeah. And that is something we can easily do. And we also know when we most need it, it's not easy to remember. And that's when we know we're meeting something that has a significant impact in our life, or had an impact in our lives. Right. So that's the invitation for now and for the rest of your life. Anytime you want to breathe and feel your body, feel your feet, it's available, and we can learn to remember.
Gregor, you have already mentioned that the nervous system is actually formed at a very early stage of our lives and also kind of has an impact on the way we perceive reality. So what does unresolved trauma actually mean for our spiritual practice, but especially for our being in relation?
Yeah, right. And maybe just to make it more concrete, so the nervous system is, of course, formed from the day of your conception. It starts. It's like also in Taoist principles, it says the beginning, the line when the first division in the cell is formed. This becomes the basis of your spine and of your central nervous system, which then unfolds into complexity, and complexity becomes our nervous system and our body, our brain, and all these things. So it's there from the get-go. And it's still forming right now. And that's a beautiful insight we have from neuroscience over the last decades, that in the past we thought, well, once you're reaching adulthood, you're kind of done. Like you formed and then you have patterns. You can learn a little bit and tweak some patterns, but you're pretty much done. But now we know that the brain is a part of the nervous system, and actually neuroscientists now say the brain is an embodied structure all over the body. There is no the brain and the body. This is all one system. That this system is learning as long as it is alive. So there is the neuroplasticity. That means we're still forming and shaping our nervous system and shaping ourselves through the way we live. That's why practice is such a powerful tool for living, because the way we practice or don't practice becomes what we are. It becomes our structure. And so you said a beautiful thing, how unrecognized trauma looks like. And I think that's a key point, because we're all to a certain degree traumatized. And I don't mean that in a pathological sense of like we're all whatever weird or strange. I mean, we all have our weird and strange places, all of it. I fully include myself. But that means that we're all born into a world that's quite wounded, a world that also has tremendous amounts of resources and strength and beauties and capacities, but there's a lot of woundedness in this world. And so we cannot come in and be untouched by that. But there are, of course, varying degrees of trauma that we all carry in ourselves, from the way we experienced the first 7 years, the first 14 years. And so these are very formative years, but we can also have very strong experiences later in life that kind of could look like they scar us for life. Like a trauma is in a way a scar that never fully healed. And maybe you have a strong band-aid over it, but when it's being touched, it still hurts. That's like a way to see that there's an experience when you think about it, it still makes you activated. And then you maybe need to avoid that situation or that thought or that person or that place or that activity. So in order to not get scarred and scared and triggered again, you narrow life, which is a response to trauma that first is good, a protection, but then becomes the next kind of suffering. So unrecognized trauma can mean that we need to limit our lives and become very confined, structured, ordered, and very focused on what we do, because it's very difficult to relax into what I am, into being. And unrecognized trauma can also look like that I'm getting very, very quickly activated or have very strong reactions, emotional reactions to seemingly small things. Like I said in the beginning, that some people seem to be quite cool about one situation, but for you or another person, that's like a big deal. And it often points to places of our developmental history where something was not fully integrated, where something happened. And in some way, my system is still busy trying to overcome that. And when something that's similar, a trigger, comes in, it feels like it's happening again. So very dramatic situations. And this is again leads us to relationships where your partner is leaving for a day and maybe hasn't announced that before, and it feels like that's the end of the relationship, just to give one example. Or just the way he looks at you and you feel like, wow, he's so disrespectful and he's like so full of disregard or hate, and the other person goes like, but wait a moment, I just had a reaction there, but I don't understand why your response is so strong, or your reaction. So basically, unrecognized trauma is suffering that we don't understand where it is coming from. And we feel we have to either control life or control ourselves or control a partner so that it doesn't happen again. So there's many, many more examples, but these are the things that where we feel we don't understand. This is what clients come in for. Like, I don't understand why I experience myself like this, or why I behave like that. I don't actually want that. And that often leads or points to a trauma where something other than you, or that you don't know about, seems to take charge of your life. And of course, that we can deepen that also are patterns that are also active in your spiritual practice, because just because we're practicing spirituality doesn't mean we're not being traumatized anymore. We leave that outside the dojo or the meditation hall.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I remember even in the information we put out on the talk, we were talking about relationship as a practice ground, where we also meet the most challenging aspects of ourselves. So maybe you could go a bit deeper into that and also mention on how spiritual practice can actually be a supportive resource on our personal healing journey.
Yeah. So I would say why relationships are so important in this, when we talk about a grounded spirituality, is because traditionally, and again, there's always been exceptions, but traditionally the focus in spiritual traditions often was not on relationships. It was often on transcending yourself, transcending your desire, transcending your needs. And that is a very, very, very powerful practice, because it connects you, as we said at the beginning, to something larger than yourself. And you're not just confined to my needs and my well-being and my desires. What can happen though, and what happened a lot, is that this drive to overcome yourself can also become not just enhancing your space, but also disconnecting from yourself. And that also means that we are disconnecting from one element of life that is fundamental to it, that is deep relationality of life. And so I said in the beginning, I think we're deeply spiritual beings, and we're deeply relational beings to our core. Like, you cannot be non-relational, because sometimes people say like, yeah, I'm not so interested in relationships. And I think like that's just not a possibility. That's one way that you maybe say, wow, relationships have been very difficult for me because I experienced so much wounding and so much frustration and the same situation and like repetitions of situations again and again. But we are relational beings from day one. You're born, at least in the classical way, from mother and father, like two principles meeting. And you're connected into a stream of ancestors, and you're connected into the web of life. Like, you're not separate. You cannot be. But sometimes we experience ourselves very isolated and very separate. And that's actually a sign of trauma, not of a reality of life. And so when we practice a spirituality that disregards or doesn't include or incorporate the aspect of relationality, we become a bit lopsided. And most likely we are not doing that because we have a wound or a pain there that I don't want to touch, which is at first intelligence. We don't want to do the things that are painful. But if we're interested in really becoming full and whole as human beings, and actually be a full, mature, grounded person for my relationships, for my kids, for my next generations, for my society, I need to include both dimensions in myself, space and also the capacity to relate. And so that's why there's lots and lots of stories, and I could tell my own, of people having very profound experiences in spiritual retreats, or just going to nature, or all kind of different practices of feeling suddenly one and unified or expanded, or having a satori, or all the different terms that are there. And then feeling like, wow, I got it. I'm like, and I hope everybody had experience. And I actually think everybody had, at least unconsciously, these experiences. And then you feel like, wow, I'm like living equanimity or expansion in space, or love, like I'm just all pervasive love. And then you either meet your family, or you come back to your relationship, or you maybe start a new relationship, and it's all good until you suddenly feel you hit the same friction points again. And people often used to get very confused about, like, but why is that? How can that be? I had this expanded state. Where did it go now? And what went wrong with my practice or with my experience? Because now I'm not having that anymore. But actually, what you're meeting right now is your spiritual practice. It's like almost like you have an expansion, like you connect to a new source of energy, which is a huge resource. Like you get perspective out of your confined box. Suddenly you're like, wow, I see it. People, because when you have such a state, often you really feel like you see something and you see more. And people say like, wow, I saw what's going on, when you're stuck in a pattern and suddenly you expand beyond that. But then when you come back, seeing it alone sometimes does transcend and also like heal or integrate something. But sometimes seeing is the first step of a journey of healing. And then you see, and then it comes into embodiment. And then you see like all the work that you have to do, or all the wounds, or all the patterns, all the difficult, painful moments, all the grief, all the tears, all the anger, all the humanness and the human mess, that is not cleansed and integrated. You meet it, and that's beautiful, and that's right. And it doesn't mean that something is wrong, but relationship give you then the kind of hints and the graceful and sometimes very ruthless kind of orientation of what your journey is needing still. And that's why it's so important and to have a spirituality that is trauma informed, because if that is not trauma informed, you could say like, oh no, the relationship was wrong, I just need to practice more. And that would sometimes even recreate more suffering and more strengthen the pattern of disconnection rather than the capacity to integrate. So yeah, I hope I answered a little bit of your question now.
Yeah, I really love that you mentioned that. And you were now also talking about, for example, explosive emotions, or emotions like anger, grief, jealousy could be another one, or also a lack of empathy, that are usually, they sometimes seem to have little space in, how to say, let's say, within certain higher principles. And I remember when we were preparing the talk, you were also mentioning that, that there is often a tendency to just omit important impulses that would actually help you to grow and ripen, if you really deal with them consciously and not suppress them, as then they would more search in more destructive ways.
Right. Yeah, it's beautiful that you bring this in, because, and like, this is really, really interesting that to become in a way so precise in our spiritual practice, and also this needs a lot of information and practice also, that I start to discern when a spiritual wisdom or orientation or guidance or concept or tenets, like principles, are really serving me on my healing journey right now. And when they become the repetition or the enhancing of painful patterns that actually lock me more into disconnection rather than bringing me into connection with something larger than myself. So, for example, like if you go into spiritual circles, and I'm saying this with all the respect there is, but of course we have to talk about it in grand strokes. There is very easily often talks about like a bit like spiritual platitudes, but they're all connected to, or most of them connected to a truth, like all is one, that at the fundamental core of existence, there's no separation, there's unity. Or also what a lot of people hear often in spiritual circles is that it's all in you. And again, that's a very, very powerful and potent, truthful statement. Or that you're eternal, like you just have to, if you have to connect to that which is larger than you and that is not bound to this experience of this lifetime alone. Again, very true and very potent. But also all these statements that I just said could become like weapons of defense, lack of empathy, or also an incapacity to relate to the painful realness of the human experience in certain moments. For example, if somebody just lost a partner or a child or a beloved one, and you say like, yeah, but like everything is eternal, that can be a consolation if it comes really from a truthful place, but it can also become like a total disregard of that this is painful and I'm grieving right now. And if my nervous system and my body is not allowed to go through that digestion process of the grief and the anger, all that comes with grief, and the conflicting feelings I have, and like metabolizing in a way all the impact of this painful experience, I will actually disconnect from something in myself that's relevant and healthy. And I would follow a certain concept then that is not really connecting me to something larger, but is disconnecting me from something. Same if your lover just left you and you say to somebody, yeah, but all is one, we're all living in unity. And maybe it's helpful, but often human compassion is way more powerful than concepts. And it actually can help us to really come to a place where this can become my experience and not a mental concept that I've heard that sounds cool, that I apply over the disconnection that I have from my pain. And I think we talked also about this. Sometimes I say it's like you have to know from which place in yourself you're using certain phrases and even wisdom statements. It's a bit like when you have a building, and that's like the developmental insight and approach. If you want to go to the 17th floor, you need to cross the first 16 floors below, and especially the building needs to stand on solid ground. If you just want to go to the 7th floor without crossing all the other floors before, it will be a tough job. And sometimes people needed to go up and become higher and more spacious in order to survive the difficult circumstances of life that they went through in childhood or in other moments. So there's a lot of things that can connect, or that where this overlaps, and where we can use certain spiritual principles as hideouts from life. And at the same time, we can also become so absorbed in our painful stories and in our connection to my intensity of my emotions and my need to feel right and my need to feel well, that I disregard any other perspective. But my experience is when such kind of phrases come, and it's not phrases, it's more like connection, comes in the right way, the nervous system in a person starts to respond and pick up the truthfulness of it. And then it becomes a useful next step to go maybe from the third to the fourth floor, just to stay with that metaphor. And yeah, so again, there's lots more that could be said here, but I think that's a first step here.
Yeah, thank you for this clarification on how to actually be able to interpret these universal truths in a better way, and that it, like, also to point out that it actually needs a lot of discernment, I feel, and ability to differentiate, and maybe also some lived experience in order to really know when does the universal wisdom apply and when it's not serving.
Right. And I would say it needs a lot of differentiation. I think it also needs, like in my life, I couldn't have done this and found out about this on my own. I needed teachers, mentors, wise guides, and teachers that helped me differentiating those things and become aware of the different places in myself and how I, pardon my English, bullshit myself, because we're extremely good, all of us as human beings, in bullshitting ourselves. It's just the way our survival mechanisms work. So very often I cannot tell where I'm blind and what I don't see. So I need other people to mirror something to me, either in a conscious setting that they have so much more experience in space so that they can mirror that back, or just by going through the lived experience of living with somebody, or having a project with somebody, or having a relationship with somebody, and what annoys you so much on the other is something that you start to become interested and see as an opportunity or as an invitation. And especially because trauma, maybe that's one thing still to say, is the experience that even if you live through many days and many decades, one thing is not changing, so that tomorrow is not different, or next year or the next relationship is not different. You're still circling around one thing that says you need to look at this. Life needs to want to develop here. And so that's what often people say, yeah, but it's all the same again and again. I change my partner, but the situation is the same. These are all signposts that something is calling for a certain integration or healing or a different kind of like empathy or compassion or embodiment, like to really embody the insight maybe that you had in an experience, to let it become in and become a resource to work through the human wounds that we all carry in ourselves, and not to use the resource as something to run away further from ourselves, because life has time and the universe has a lot more time than we have. You cannot cheat energy. You can cheat with your mind, you can tell yourself stories, but you cannot cheat energy. And that, where we land, what you said was beautiful in the beginning, where we suddenly land in something with a more honest look at myself, and it brings in more humility, and it always brings in more compassion for myself and for the suffering of other people, which is important, because you said often spirituality can also become very disconnected and with a big lack of empathy. It's just like you're just creating this for yourself, these kind of phrases that can become very harsh, even though, again, they carry a certain truth, but it needs to be discerned.
Yeah, if I may, I would come back to one point that you mentioned and bring a new aspect into that. And there was this state of expansion that you were mentioning, and that we probably all know in one way or the other. And at one point, also in the preparation, you were talking about that there are two different states of kind of emergence when it comes to relationship. That sometimes when we're in relation, there is this kind of experience where boundaries seemingly dissolve and you merge with the other person, but that there are actually two different approaches to that, or let's say one that is happening more unconsciously and another one that is more of a choice. So I would love you to go a little bit into that.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful that you pick up on that. It's because that's for it's crucial information for relationships, and basically goes for spiritual practice as well. That again, what we need for that is that we have an understanding of life's development. Because as human beings, we're not born here and it's all there. We're not delivered just fresh out of the package. We grow. So we go through a developmental sequence that give us different capacities. And it means when we start out in life, it's deeply relational, but it's also symbiotic. It's a merged state with mother in the womb. And it's beautiful and blissful. And there's also a download already of like universal consciousness, we could say, into that kind of state of the baby being absorbed and held if the situation is safe. But the experience there is not a differentiated experience of being unified with something larger. It's just all there is. And then when we go through life, there is more separation and more separation and more separation. Like you get out of the womb and then you become even more distant from your mother. You develop your autonomy. You can go away and you can be different than your mother and your family. And later on, you do your own thing, hopefully. And you become more and more individuated in psychological terms. And that carries with it sometimes, or for most people, also a sense of more disconnection sometimes. So we don't feel so often so deeply connected to everything, which we can still, like through love or spacious expansion. And then from a certain age on, we're kind of like searching for coming back. But coming back is not coming back going down the ladder, but coming back is coming back up into the expanded state that we all are, but having gone through separation. And so when people go into relationships, it can be that we first meet and we feel like one, love at first sight, and a beautiful merging situation, and you just want to be together and you just want to be like this, and it feels like you want to abandon yourself, and it's beautiful. But when people, and then if this goes on well, again, at some point you also, then you have some frictions, or you want to be now in your own space, and then you find your own rhythm of being two individuals creating a space together, but not abandoning your individualness. But now a lot of people, all of us to some degree, have wounds through that developmental journey. And so in those places, maybe we have either experienced that we were absorbed too much. So for us, merging is like, it's like we are allergic to it. So I don't even go into relationships too much. And I need to maintain my autonomy at all costs, always, because otherwise people will engorge on me. Or other people have experienced, and this is simplified, but just to give a ground or a grand orientation, other people have experienced like not enough contact, and there's always a yearning for more connection. And then when somebody's there that feels available to this, it feels like I just don't want to get out of that contact anymore. Problem is you cannot go like this state through life, because also you are supposed to be an individual and to develop further, and it's not suitable for an adult life. So people then will need to work on this so that I can feel as an individual, but that is an individual that is fully capable of meeting very deeply without collapsing my personal boundaries. And that's again now very important where trauma comes in, because trauma does one thing very often. Either it enhances our boundaries very, very strong, so they don't become like permeable spheres, but they become brick concrete walls. I need to protect myself. Or trauma can also have the effect of like losing my sense of boundaries, and I don't even know that I have boundaries and where they are and how to take care of them. And if somebody comes together with me who maybe also doesn't have such a good sense of boundaries, it feels very good, because at least we're together and we create a bubble for ourselves. But that always is like when it's a dramatic, passionate, intense meeting, it also will be a passionate, intense conflict sooner or later. It always is like, it's like a formula. And it's, again, that is right, because life says, no, 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 wait, you're not supposed to be like this. You're an adult, but now this needs to happen. And then you go, but something's wrong now. And you try to recreate that. And romance novels, Hollywood movies, old classical stories are full of those confusions also. So we have very little good understanding of what is a individuated capacity where I can fully meet and relate and have deep compassion and nourishing each other, but I stay myself and I stay true to my calling of myself and my autonomy, but my autonomy is not disconnecting me from deeply relating to you. And so this understanding of, am I falling in love, like falling down, collapsing my individuality and myself, or am I rising in love, and love that I feel for one other person is giving me the fuel and the drive and the beauty to actually go on my journey, to feel that love is not just with you, it's within me, and it's with everything, and it's with the whole universe, with this whole existence. But it can feel like a state of unity that can sound like or feel like even the same, but it's vastly different experiences. And again, sometimes in spirituality, there's not trauma informed or not developmentally informed, these states can be confused. And that's a big tragedy, because then if you call falling down the ladder of merging a spiritual experience, in a way you lock yourself into a place of not being able to practice that which brings you really closer to God. And that's why I'm also so passionate about this, because you can, with the wrong or the lacking information, you can also stay stuck in certain patterns for a very long time, and it doesn't have to be.
If you allow, I would bring up one last point before we go into the self-inquiry practice and the breakout sessions. We have now been mainly focusing on the topic of relationships, and you also said we are actually all wounded. The world at large is wounded, and a kind of split that is often showing up in relationships, but also in our society, is the split between heart and power. And that there are there's more a wounding attached to females and one more to male. So maybe you could dive a bit into that and also focus on the relationship and then on the bigger context of society.
Okay, simple question for 3 minutes. that's that big question, but it's I'm happy to just give it a go, because I think what we experience between men and women, and I don't mean just in physical form, men and women, but more like the masculine, the feminine, the way it shows up in people in different ways, is one of the core wounds of our life and of our times. And I don't know how long past it goes back it goes, we don't know, but there's good evidence that it goes back for a long time already. And it also kind of can be seen in the split between a more relationally immanent approach to life, where you go in, like matriarchal societies, you go in and you connect to your feelings, to your needs, to your emotions, to your beauty, to your abundance, to the earth, and you go. And the other way that is more transcendent oriented, you go into space, you go out and you expand and you try to disconnect or overcome your needs and your impulses. And both, again, are needed. It's like the mother and the father principle for life. You need both. But when mother and father are not talking to each other and thinking that the other one is the bad one in the family and corrupting the child is lost between them. And it's a bit like where humanity is right now, that we're a bit lost between the fight between these seemingly opposites, which doesn't have to be this way. And then to your question, very generally speaking, men have more a tendency to go into the transcendent dimension that also connects more to anger and autonomy, like my drive. And women have more tendency to be focused on the emotional world, the relationality, just because women, for the most part, bear children, so that there is a strong orientation there. And then again, you come into a relationship as a man and a woman, or whatever, as two men, two women, all the different setups functions along the same principles. And then you have fights and disconnections and difficulties, and you take it very personal. But that also, and it is very personal, and at the same time is not personal at all, because it is also the kind of downloaded pain points of humanity happening through these two people playing itself out. Like, because life is trying to heal itself, like trauma in our bodies is trying to heal itself. That's why it keeps repeating, because it wants to go to the next level. And it also goes through our relationships that wants to go to the next level. And we have a personal responsibility to look how this lives very personally me, because everybody carries a puzzle of that woundedness of the world, but not everybody has everything. We have one puzzle, like in an orchestra, we have one instrument that we need to play. And if you land it in your body with your history, with your family, with your story, you have this life to play, and you can say, oh, it would be better to have another life. Well, that choice has been made already, and it's pointless to argue. But healing means coming to terms with that this is my life, and these are my challenges, these are my qualities, my resources, my powers, and this is where I need to practice. And so that's also where I didn't mention that in the beginning. Let's talk about so many things. A big, more recent development in trauma and an understanding of trauma is also transgenerational trauma, that a lot of patterns we now know that we carry in ourselves they didn't happen from an experience that I had in this life, in this body, but they got inherited through the genetic structures or epigenetics, maybe from my grandfathers and grandmothers generation, or even further, can go up to 7 generations. So there's a continuity of resilience and qualities in life, but there's also a continuity of pain and of wounding that life wants to heal. And it's almost like it's downloaded in you, and now you have a chance to work through it, which becomes your own salvation, but it also becomes the potential salvation for the world at large. So that's the the very personal to the grand scale of things in 3 minutes.
Wow. Well, thank you for bringing all those threads together. Then here I would suggest a transition to the self-inquiry.
Right. Good. And I would invite everybody to again take a little breath, because we've been hearing, listening, sitting here for quite a while. So just give yourself a moment to breathe and just to notice that you're here, wherever here is for you right now, and what feels right, what orients you to be maybe more relaxed. And we're going to go into a bit of a time to share with each other, so that this is not just you listening, but you also participating, because everybody's contributing. And it can really start with a moment to recognize I'm here. Recognize I have the time to breathe out and to really feel my body, and from that place of feeling more embodied, to allow what feels relevant to come into my mind and into my awareness. Right. So in the background now, Simon is going to prepare some breakout rooms that will be probably be put together in groups of 3. That should even work out. And where then you will have 5 minutes to explore a question, which I'll give you in a moment. And just to give you guidance for how that works, so you'll be put into...
May I just make sure everybody of you wants to participate, because we made it voluntary. So just in case anyone prefers not to join, please write a message in the chat, and then we will take care of that.
Great. That's called trauma-informed facilitation that you just did. Allowing the voluntariness of and the own autonomy to make that decision. It's great. So if you decide to be in that breakout room with 2 other people, you will have 2 minutes just to arrive. And then Simon is also going to give you the prompts to start and then give you a signal for change from each person to the next every 5 minutes. So each of you will have 5 minutes to share. And in that time, I really encourage you to, when it's your time to listen, to really listen wholeheartedly. And don't try to focus to understand, but just let it in and let it come to you and just see what touches you and how you respond to what you hear. And at the same time, not responding like it's not a dialogue, not a discussion. And then in the end, there will be again a few minutes to wrap up together, and then we'll come back here and have time for Q&A. And so what I would invite you to share and to explore is, first of all, maybe what has touched you or reached you or sparked your interest when you listen to our talk here. And maybe there's already a thought of like, what has brought me here, what's interesting you, what is interesting for you in even joining this talk. And then I would like or invite you to see, we talked a little bit before about these 2 dimensions of life, that one we could call the more spiritual approach that creates and gives us the capacity to connect to space, to something larger, where you get a perspective on yourself and your life and your emotions and your behavior. And suddenly you feel like, oh, wow, I'm actually larger than what I usually experience. And you feel like through meditation or different practices or connecting to nature or other resources, there is a state that where you can connect to like the bird's view on your own life. And that's very powerful. And again, when that is unrecognized as a tendency, it can also become what we talked before. It can also become a distance, of being aloof, of being maybe having more disregard to the lower emotions of human beings or relationship and like how people are just stuck in their own stories. So that's one dimension. And the other one is where what we will call more the immanence or the embodiment or the groundedness of life, where you are in the experience of life. And you also know, and that's what is the therapeutic work more around, you know, you need to work through some patterns in order to heal and to become more complete. And there's also the beauty and the passion and the power and the vitality and the juiciness of the humanness and the human mess is happening here. And also, if we are just in life and we don't have perspective, it can also become very identified and very focused and egotistical on my needs and my wanting to be right and my preferences and my well-being. So it's all around me. And again, so I would like you to explore a little bit what's easy for you. So where is maybe a natural resource in your life to connect to the beauty of space or to connect to the beauty of structure of life, to be in the body and to enjoy, to have pleasure, and to really validate that, because we all have a little bit of a preference, and it's not about trying to get a balance of each both, but to have an awareness of where we have a preference. And maybe you worked already with that a lot anyway, but to see where is your preference? What's easy, what comes easy for you? And also to see what's more difficult. And maybe most likely you already met those challenges, and most likely you met them in relationships or in connecting to life, and to see what's the challenge there and what is the invitation. Yeah? And maybe you already know that certain tendencies that you have had also developed out of survival mechanisms or ways to cope with difficult situations in your life. And again, if that's so and you want to share about that, that's great. But let's do it from a way of respecting, not of like this shouldn't be, but of curiosity and of interest. And so there's a lot of different, let's say, avenues that you can explore. And it's just 5 minutes, so I would give you that as a starter for the conversation, and be really also curious what you hear from the other people. And again, there's no good, there's no bad. What makes us grow is awareness of how things are, and honesty, humility, and a little humor are the best ingredients. So is there any question about the inquiry or the way of how to do the sharing practice together?
Maybe for now, just on the time frame. So it's 5 minutes per person. We have 3 persons in each group, so it will be around 15 minutes, right?
Right. So 5 minutes each, 2 minutes before, 2 minutes after, and Simon's going to give you the time coordinations, and then you'll be brought here back and we have time for the Q&A.
Okay, so there are a couple of people who are not joining. For those, they can have a break in between, and we meet again in about 19 minutes.
Enjoy.
Welcome back, everybody. Well, we hope you enjoyed your exchange in the breakout sessions. And now we would open the floor for questions. So if you have any questions on your mind, feel free to approach Gregor with them.
First of all, thanks. I really enjoyed your conversation, or how you answer all the questions. My question to you is that out of all the relationships, I imagine the most important is the relationship with myself. And even in that, like, I go through different states. For example, just as an example, when you were talking during the first 20 minutes or so, I was in and out. Every time you were saying something super important, I disappeared and reappeared, kind of. First, I had a story in my head that this could be because I had too much coffee or I'm tired, blah, blah, blah. So my question to you is, how can I relate to myself when I'm tired, or in general? For example, I want to, like, I smoke sometimes, and that, again, that's another state where I am not really aware. I just pick up the cigarette, start lighting it, and boom. So yeah, how does it work with myself, the relationship? And yeah.
Yeah, great question, Veno. Thank you. As I really appreciate your honesty, and then the way you shared it, and what you share is so fundamental to the human experience. I mean, who of us here doesn't know that if you want to concentrate, you want to listen to your partner, or you sit down to meditate and you think you're going to watch your breath, and boom, suddenly you're gone, or you actually only know when you come back, like, oh my God, where have I been? It's like, it's so, we call it normal. Like, I thought for many years that's just how the human mind functions. And it's so rampant and so everywhere that we say that's the human mind, and that we have a short attention span, and we can focus on something for a while and then we check out. To me, more and more, it appears that this is also signs of trauma, where we cannot stay present to an experience, and we haven't also developed and trained the capacity to stay present, stay here for prolonged times. And that's exactly, again, what you actually try to practice with meditation, or all forms of spiritual practices are ways to be here, because the spiritual premise is be here. Why check up? Be here. Like, it's beautiful if you're here. It's horrible if you're not here. And so what you describe is very personal again, and it's the same time is totally non-personal. it's the state of the mind of the human beings living right now. And then we have very personal stories with this. And what I really appreciated what you were the way you were talking about it, that I didn't hear, or at least strongly, you criticizing yourself for this. And of course, you note, or maybe let's say it like this, there was some criticism, but you becoming aware of this is like, this is the story that I tell myself there. And that's practice, that's meditation. You're becoming aware, you observe yourself. Oh, first of all, I cannot be here all the time. Second, and then I have a story about like, because of this and because of that, mind trying to create meaning and explanations. But then the most interesting is not why is it happening, because we don't fully know. We will find out on the way. And also, it's not so interesting to know like what's wrong about it or what should be done about it, but more like, this is happening. Like in meditation, that's the central practice. Or with thinking, people often interpret spirituality or meditations like the space, and you're not allowed to think, which results in a lot of thinking because you cannot not do something. It's impossible. So, but the practice is not to not think. The practice is to become aware, like, oh my God, I'm busying myself with thinking so much, because just simply being here is very difficult. And if one goes really into meditation, you will notice reasons why it's difficult to be here. And some are sometimes just pure physiological, biological. You didn't sleep, so you're tired, and then you need to rest. Even that, great yogis have found ways that this can also be included in large spaciousness where you need less space, less sleep, and so forth. But anyway, for us being here right now, it's just a practice to be, I'm aware. And in a way, there is also signals for your body. Maybe I'm exhausting myself. Oh, I need too much coffee and cigarettes to maintain the rhythm of a fast-paced life that we all live, and so forth, where we are violating natural rhythms of our body and of our being because of trauma that didn't start with you, but it's from many, many generations. So to your question of what to do with it, nothing at first to do with it, but to become curious and interested what that teaches you about yourself and your life when you pay attention to it. And then that means that you, in any kind of practice that you have, that you become interested, like, oh, when you come back, you're like, interesting, I was checked out, interesting. And then also what you said was great, then to become more interested, even like, maybe I check out not at random moments, but at moments that actually would touch something. You said like super interesting, like I'm gone. So I don't know yet, but nothing in this experience is random, nothing. I deeply, deeply believe that by now. There's nothing like weird that's just a weird phenomenon. It all has meaning, just in a way that we haven't comprehended yet the context of it, everything. And that's cool. Like if you go from that place, it's all an invitation to explore something, and in a way to create more compassion about myself, to not bash myself, and to say like, wow, it's really interesting. It should be simple, just be here. And to notice it's the hardest thing in the world. And no money can buy it, no power can deal with it. It's something very intimate. Like you said, it's the most intimate relationship I have in my life with my own presence, and therefore with God, or whatever else you call the big mystery of life. Because when you're here, also all the information is here. You know, like everything is here. It's like online. When you're online, the internet is available. If you're offline, it's great to know that there is the internet with all the wisdom of all the times, but you can't get there. So our presence is in a way our connection to our, what my teacher Thomas Hugo often says, the subtle net, like the subtle internet of all information that is always present anyways. And what we meet on the way that makes us non-present is our non-integrated wounded places. if we're more and more integrated, also people know that, suddenly it's easier to stay present. It's easier to stay present in a relational difficulty with somebody, or just sitting by myself enjoying nature and not checking out all the time. And pleasure, like just enjoying pleasure, not thinking about what would be better now. Like, no, this is here right now and I'm enjoying my senses. So it was a bit of a long-winded answer to your question that that give you some new orientation. Cool. And thank you for it. It's a beautiful observation to become aware of these patterns that we carry. Thank you, Vino.
Thank you.
Hi, Gregor. Hello, everybody. So it was interesting, the last question involved the self, myself, and as possibly the oldest guy in the forum, the self that I feel now, when I just look into myself, feels exactly the same and unchanged, although I'm a few years older than the youngest self I remember, being like 3. Feels that it's continuous and nothing has changed. On the other hand, it's almost as if I'm carrying a number of selves. So if I trigger, something causes me to trigger, and there begins a little journey of a few hours, couple of days, 3 days, and I kind of watch this. It's a pattern that I'm familiar with, that I've seen happen many times. So when that happens, sometimes I'm not surprised, but it's like I look at a different self going through a journey that I've come to expect, and I'll just allow it to happen. But that is a separate self and I can't break into it. Or if I'm at a stage in my life when I'm very spiritual and having a lot of growth and expansion, that seems quite a different self-possessed self to the guy who's mid-career and completely engrossed in material growth and looking after people. Like a number of different selves, and yet feels one. It's a strange kind of contradiction. We've spoken before, you and I, about there's a young boy there, so I can just sit down, as it were, metaphorically, with the young me and put my arm around him and say it's okay, and be present with my older wisdom or perspective with the young kid. So it's like different selves, but on the other hand, it all feels like one. It's just an interesting reflection to me, anyway.
So first, in general, when I listen to you, it's also, again, another beautiful example of different approaches to life, because in more traditional approaches to spirituality, where like Zen, for example, you would notice these selves, but not inquire into them. You would notice, there's a self. Thank you very much. Again, I'm simplifying, and become aware that you are aware of this, which is exactly what you're doing. You're creating space into an experience. Otherwise, many people go through life and just are these different selves. Sometimes I'm like this, sometimes I'm like that. Sometimes they wonder why am I different, but or just impulsively react out of these selves and not even become aware, like, oh, it's different. It's more like just that's how it is. So creating awareness to notice, like, oh, sometimes I feel like that. Sometimes I feel like this. Sometimes I'm that kind of guy. I'm the holiday guy or the business guy, or a different self, or over time in the different phase of life. And still in Zen or in other witnessing traditions, you would not inquire into them, to not get entangled into them, and just let them be and become more and more identified with the self that you speak, like that is always the same. Because your real self, there's traditions where you call the small self with a small s, like your personal ego, or the big self with a big capital S, that which is larger than your personality. So you can be more embodied and identified with this. And that doesn't change, really. It's a movement. It's also not a static self. But now also, it's very interesting, even when I listen to you, to become aware of like, there's this permanent, unchanged ground reality of my awareness. and there's all these different layers to myself that also has information of life. It's almost like encapsulated bubbles of life force. And if they're not participating in the big stream, life is missing something and they will create symptoms. So to become aware of like, this self is interesting. What does it teach me? And this self is interesting. What is it teaching me about life and about myself? And most interestingly, can they speak with each other, or do they live in very separate rooms and they can never meet each other? Or like you said, the adult self in you can meet the younger self in you, and there's a healing of a new form of relationship that once was very wounding, now can become a healing experience coming together. And that's what healing does, bringing things that used to be divided, cut, differentiated, dissociated, into contact again, into relationship back. And then these formerly disconnected bubbles of life are participating again in the river of life. And that's again a model we use in trauma work, where trauma creates separate, dissociated entities, and we feel very different. Or we can feel different, but fluid in the differences of life, but they are participating in one stream. So that's what's coming to me when I listen to you. And it's again the power of observing, this is happening, and not just observing at a distance, but observing with a loving, compassionate interest. It's an experience that everybody knows, these different parts of ourselves. So it's totally normal. It's more like, what quality of connection do they have with each other and I am having with them? That's the interesting part. And that's where a melting of rigid differences can become a loving dance of, I'm many different things and I'm one.
Are there any other questions, either on spirituality, trauma, relational dynamics, or you can also share from what you experienced in the breakout sessions?
I'm still with something you said before, answering Venu's question, that the things that kind of tend to pull us away from the present moment is trauma. That's how I understood it. And so when I go into meditation practice, for example, that sounds to me like, I'm kind of practicing to be in the present moment. And it sounds to me like I have no choice but encountering my trauma in that practice. And what I'm kind of wondering about at the moment is, what if I kind of happen upon things in my practice that are too big to handle for me? And maybe you could speak to this kind of practicing, being on a spiritual path in this individualized culture that at least I'm part of.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. Thank you, Simon. And first of all, you said it, I think, super precise. When I don't have and all of us, not just you, we don't have a choice about whether we want to meet our trauma or not. It's like you go into a relationship and you feel like you're really committed, they're going to be loving, they're going to be present, they're going to be compassionate, communicate directly from the heart. And you go in there and you have all the good intentions, and suddenly you find yourself becoming that awful person again, or maybe not even so awful, but like just being disregarding, disrespectful, not paying attention, having all your habits online. And then you want to, where did that come from? Where did that intention come from? So we could like, that's how life is, or say there is an intelligence at work that you don't have control over, that you don't have conscious autonomy over or agency over. And that is trauma in one way of defining it. That means you will meet it anyway. And that's as much as we can try with our intention and our will to be a better person. And this can go a very, very far way. We can really grow through our intention, and we grow. If you're really serious about practice, we grow. And there is a certain kind of growth that will not happen just by your intention and your will. And it's exactly like you said, you meet something that feels maybe sometimes too large, even for your own meditation practice. And that's the moment when a trauma-informed spirituality or facilitators or retreat leaders or whatever would notice now maybe it's not the time just to continue practicing more, but to notice it needs something else. It maybe needs a relational space so that something can relax and become aware of what is circulating there, or what is even just too big for you to handle, and you need support and stronger resources around you so that this can be healing and integrating itself. And then the practice can be increased in the next moment in a much deeper way. And I think you also mentioned something. There are certain wounds that show up in all of ourselves, what now some people call collective trauma, that are too big for all of us. And we need containers and like support that is way bigger than one person or one therapeutic setting. It needs like all of us as human beings to come together and notice what we have been doing with each other, like wounding ourselves and the planet and everything alive very seriously. And not in a self-bashing way, but noticing, wow, we need to create space, a lot more space, so that something can even appear and become not unrecognized trauma that just repeats itself, but become trauma that we can start to work with. Because as a culture, we're still very uninformed about these kind of patterns, I would say. And we cannot go immediately to healing, but we can go to a society that is aware that we are traumatized and we have wounds and we carry these things with ourselves, and they're not just done just because it's 70 years in the past or 150 or 30, but these are things we're still working through. So that's the larger dimension also what I'm very passionate about, that people learn to connect together. Like what we're doing here, we create a space in which more of our information about our wounds, in our history, in also our resources and in our strength can appear. And then maybe the next step can happen. And so I think that's at least what I hear when I hear you're describing this, that we don't have a choice, but we have the choice of meeting it unconsciously through symptoms, or become active in the way that I embrace it when I face it and when it shows up. And then I look for support and resources and learn to practice compassion for myself and for others, because we're all in this, and nobody gets a free ticket, like nobody. I used to think there are some people maybe that are beyond. And I meet a lot of people, and I met very powerful and very advanced people, and we're all in it. Absolutely, definitely. And this is very beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your questions to all of you. And Gregor, thank you for your wisdom and for sharing from your experience and knowledge. And well, thank you also for kind of inspiring a version of spirituality that is grounded and relational, and also rooted in a lived experience. And maybe I would invite you to leave us by pointing us to how these three dimensions that we have been talking about today can actually support us to be more embodied and open to life. And also, what does it actually mean for you?
Yeah. So just to wrap it up together, I would say again, what we also noticed, also people sharing the deep power of how important and strengthening and empowering it is to have a spiritual practice, whatever the form is, but to have some kind of practice that gives you access to something larger than yourself, or you're practicing in alignment with something larger than yourself. And even if it's just sitting down, just for 10 minutes a day, and just watch your breath, because the breath is larger than yourself. It connects you to all living beings right now. And there are many different forms of practices that you can do, but it's so powerful that you strengthen that skill or that muscle that we just heard people describing my experience. Because we're just in, it's very difficult to work and even heal through something. I need to first become aware. So that's the power and the immense resource of spirituality, and also connecting you to something that gives you meaning. Like it's right, and it's meaningful, and it's good to be here. Because in trauma, often we lose the sense and the meaning of life. That's one of the devastating effects of trauma, that you lose. It's like, why am I even here? What is it good for? And that's also then when we bring back trauma into spirituality, that means that we really pay attention to how we've been wounded, what we are carrying, what life is trying to tell us through our patterns. That means we pay attention to our relationships, like Venus said, the relationship with myself, or the relationship with my partner, with my families, all the people that annoy me. And I would wish that they would be more conscious to regard them more and more as invitations rather than disturbances to my spiritual practice. That not, if other people would be more conscious, my spiritual practice would be much easier, but they're actually giving you opportunities, which we of course often don't like, to actually practice and develop a skill and a strength of compassion and care, differentiation, setting your boundaries, and so forth. And that working through that, really the things that annoy you and trigger you become again fuel for compassion and for love, and seeing how other people suffer, and becoming more warm-hearted in our spiritual practice. And that again fuels your spiritual practice. So the crucible of the relationships where all these meets are just such rich opportunities to really become intimate with life again, because that's what we all long for, to be intimate with God, with life, and with ourselves. And if we, and none of us can do it perfectly, we will all stumble our way through, and that's beautiful, but we can pay attention and have our heart open to the situations that feel difficult, and joyful and pleasant and pleasurable.
Well, thank you so much, Gregor, and thank you to all of you for joining us in this exploration. And Gregor, if you like, then I would invite you to just share on upcoming opportunities if some of the people here would like to continue the journey with you.
Yeah. So first of all, also thank you to you, Nadine, for hosting this beautiful event. I really enjoyed also the way you host and ask questions. It's very generous the way you offer the space here, and to everybody else for bringing yourself here to be interested and to participate, to share. It's also a big contribution. And yes, so if people would like to work with me, I work in private practice also at the moment, mostly offline, online, not so much offline anymore. Right now I don't have space to take individual clients, but there are a few select workshops that you can work with me. The next one is a constellation workshop in Vienna, in Austria, at the beginning of September, I think 2nd and 3rd. You can find that on my website, and Nadine is going to send out an email with all the information. And there's also a training for men that also deals a lot with the topic of relationship and embodiment and spirituality. So that's for men only. That happens in Prague in the Czech Republic, but is English speaking and is open for international participants. And it starts this autumn. And you can also find all the information on my website. And if you want to stay up to date, I also send out regular newsletters with inspirations and some sharings and thoughts of mine once in a while. So you can go to my website, integralbeing.at, and just subscribe to the newsletter. And I'll offer also webinars and things like this in not regular terms, but once in a while. So if you want to stay updated, that's the best way. I think that's, yeah, and love to see you somewhere, someplace, in some way or the other.
Well, and all the best to you, and thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you, Nadine. And thank you, everybody. Have a good, wonderful summer evening if you're in summer zone.
You for all of
Thank you.
being here.